Few could have imagined that world-renowned scientists, often labeled as materialists by society, would one day speak openly about topics that science tends to avoid. In their world, even one wrong word can mark a career forever. And yet, they did speak. And what they said was astonishing. They didn't claim visions or divine encounters. They spoke from reason, from experience, from the edge where science meets the unknown. Some had near-death experiences. Others turned to quantum physics, and one of them, after mapping the human genome, declared that the soul cannot be reduced to brain chemistry alone. This video is not about belief. It's about what these brilliant minds, Einstein, Jung, Penrose, Collins, really said. About the soul, about consciousness, about what may await us after death. These are not myths. These are documented words, recorded thoughts, personal confessions. And what they reveal might change how we understand life itself. Sir Roger Penrose, one of the most brilliant theoretical physicists of our time and a Nobel Prize laureate, has never shied away from tackling the biggest and most controversial questions about human existence. Best known for his groundbreaking work on black holes and space-time geometry, Penrose is also one of the few world-renowned scientists who has publicly explored the mystery of consciousness and what might happen to it after death. At the heart of his exploration lies the orchestrated objective reduction theory, which he developed in collaboration with American anesthesiologist Stuart Hameroff. This theory is not mere speculation. It is an ambitious scientific attempt to bridge physics, neuroscience, and metaphysics. According to OR, human consciousness is not merely the result of biochemical interactions in the brain. Instead, it arises from quantum-level processes occurring inside microtubules, tiny structures found in the neurons of the brain. These microtubules, Penrose suggests, are capable of supporting quantum superposition states, meaning they can exist in multiple states simultaneously, like particles in quantum physics. What makes this theory especially remarkable is what it implies about death. According to OR, consciousness is not confined solely to the physical brain. Rather, it may be a fundamental feature of the universe, encoded in the very fabric of space and time. When a person dies, the quantum information stored in these microtubules is not necessarily lost. Instead, it may leak out or redistribute into a deeper level of reality, something akin to a quantum field that persists beyond the body. In other words, consciousness might not be extinguished at death, but rather transformed, continued, or returned to a greater whole. Penrose himself has stated, consciousness may be something like a field, which doesn't go away. He emphasizes that this is not just poetic language. His position is rooted in the observation that traditional physics and standard neuroscience have so far failed to explain how subjective experience arises. No current theory in classical science can account for the hard problem of consciousness. Why and how we have an inner life, emotions, awareness, or the feeling of being me. For Penrose, this gap signals that we are missing something fundamental. This is why he turned to quantum mechanics. In his earlier book, The Emperor's New Mind, Penrose laid the foundation for his argument that consciousness involves non-algorithmic processes, meaning it cannot be replicated by computers or artificial intelligence. Something about the mind goes beyond mere calculation. That something, he proposed, is linked to quantum gravity and objective reduction, a process where quantum superpositions collapse not due to observation, but due to the curvature of spacetime itself. While OR remains a controversial theory, it is not easily dismissed. Hameroff and Penrose have published extensively on the subject in peer-reviewed journals, and their work has generated debate among physicists, neuroscientists, and philosophers alike. It is one of the few serious attempts to treat consciousness as more than an epiphenomenon, as something woven into the very structure of the cosmos. Critically, the implications of this theory extend far beyond the lab. If consciousness is a quantum phenomenon, and if quantum information is never truly lost, as some interpretations of quantum physics suggest, then what we experience as death may not be the end of consciousness. Instead, it may mark a transition, a redistribution of awareness, or even a merging with a more fundamental layer of reality. Penrose is careful in his statements. He does not make religious claims, nor does he speak of souls in the theological sense. Yet his scientific approach leads to conclusions that resonate deeply with spiritual traditions around the world, that consciousness survives, evolves, or returns after death. He has acknowledged that Orkor opens the door to the possibility of post-mortem consciousness, not as a ghost story, but as a natural extension of quantum principles. In his most recent works, Penrose continues to push the boundaries. He remains committed to the idea that a true understanding of consciousness must come from uniting the laws of quantum physics with the mysteries of the human mind. We don't yet know what consciousness really is, he says, but it's not simply chemical reactions, it's something deeper. To many, his work represents the cutting edge of modern science, reaching back toward the oldest human questions. Is there something after death? Do we go on in some form? While Penrose offers no definitive answer, he insists the question is not unscientific. It's just one we've barely begun to understand. In a world where most scientists avoid any discussion of life after death, Penrose stands as a rare voice, willing to look beyond the visible into the quantum depths of mind and matter. His work reminds us that consciousness may not be a fragile byproduct of biology, but a fundamental aspect of the universe itself. In 1944, Carl Gustav Jung, one of the most influential psychologists of the 20th century, had a near-death experience that would permanently reshape not only his worldview, but his entire approach to life, death, and the soul. At the time, Jung was hospitalized after breaking his foot and suffering a subsequent heart attack. While unconscious, he underwent what he later described as a profound, out-of-body journey that took him far beyond the realm of clinical science. Jung wrote in his memoir Memories, Dreams, Reflections that during his unconscious state, he experienced himself floating far above the Earth, looking down at the planet as though from space. The experience was vivid, hyper-real. He saw Earth bathed in a radiant blue light, serene and beautiful, suspended in the cosmos. Time seemed to vanish, and as he hovered in that state, he approached a dark stone temple, a place that felt sacred, ancient, and deeply familiar. It was there that he felt he had reached the threshold of another world. But before he could cross it, he was called back. When he awoke, Jung didn't brush the experience aside as a hallucination or a trick of the brain. On the contrary, he insisted that what he had encountered was real, more real than ordinary life. It was as though I now carried along with me something that could not be destroyed, he wrote. It was as if I now possessed a sense of my own being that could not be shaken. He referred to the experience not as a dream or vision, but as a direct encounter with another dimension of reality. This near-death experience became a turning point in Jung's thought. Though he had always been open to the mystical and symbolic aspects of the psyche, he now began to speak more directly about death, not as an end, but as a return. He described the sensation he felt during his experience as one of absolute peace, deep clarity, and profound familiarity. It wasn't frightening. It was comforting. He wrote, "It was like returning to a knowledge that had always been there." For Jung, this was not just a personal revelation. It was a validation of what he had long suspected, that human consciousness is not limited to the waking ego. There is something within us, what he called the self, that transcends time, space, and physical death. After his experience, Jung increasingly integrated spiritual, religious, and mythological ideas into his work. He did not see them as superstitions, but as expressions of deep psychological truth, symbols pointing toward dimensions beyond the material. In many of his later writings, Jung explored the archetype of death and rebirth, the journey into the underworld, fate, and the idea of a collective unconscious, a shared field of psychic experience that connects all human beings. He argued that cultures across the world speak of the afterlife not merely because of tradition, but because of something real that lies beneath the surface of individual awareness. His own experience, he believed, placed him momentarily in contact with that deeper reality. Crucially, Jung refused to draw a hard line between psychology and spirituality. He believed that dismissing the metaphysical simply because it cannot be measured was a form of intellectual blindness. The soul, he said, is not made of matter and therefore cannot be weighed or dissected, but it can be known. He criticized both organized religion for becoming dogmatic and modern science for denying the soul's existence entirely. In his view, true understanding comes from integrating both, the rational and the mystical, the seen and the unseen. His writings began to reflect this synthesis. He explored alchemy, Gnostic texts, Eastern philosophies, and Christian mysticism, not as religious dogma, but as symbolic systems describing the same essential truths. Jung saw these traditions as different languages for the same experience: the soul's journey toward wholeness and its return to a greater source beyond death. Throughout his later life, Jung spoke openly about his conviction that the psyche continues after physical death. He never claimed to know the details, but he was certain that consciousness does not simply disappear. "My soul," he wrote in his final years, "seems to me something very real and eternal. I cannot believe it will just vanish." Jung's position was not theological, it was experiential. He was not preaching, he was describing. His clinical expertise, combined with his personal journey, gave him a unique voice among scientists and thinkers. He stood between two worlds, the empirical and the transcendent, and he urged others not to deny the unknown, but to approach it with reverence, curiosity, and humility. To this day, Jung's near-death experience stands as one of the most deeply documented and intellectually respected accounts of what might lie beyond life. It has inspired psychologists, spiritual seekers, and even medical professionals exploring the frontiers of consciousness. His words continue to resonate because they do not offer dogma, but insight, spoken from the threshold between life and whatever comes next. Dr. Francis Collins stands as one of the most respected and influential scientists of the modern era. A physician geneticist who led the Human Genome Project and later served as the director of the National Institutes of Health, Collins is recognized not only for his groundbreaking scientific achievements, but also for his unflinching openness about his Christian faith. In a world where science and religion are often portrayed as fundamentally opposed, Collins occupies a rare and thoughtful space in between, insisting that faith and reason not only can coexist, but enrich one another. In his best-selling book, The Language of God, Collins recounts his personal journey from atheism to belief. As a young medical doctor, he found himself unprepared for the spiritual questions posed by his dying patients. One day, a woman asked him directly, "Doctor, what do you believe?" And he realized he had no real answer. That moment marked the beginning of a search that would lead him to explore the philosophical and moral foundations of belief. What began as curiosity became a profound personal transformation. Collins describes how he eventually came to believe in a creator, not out of emotional need, but through a careful examination of science, philosophy, and experience. But what makes Collins especially significant in the context of life after death is not just his faith, it's how he reconciles that faith with a deep, technical understanding of biology, genetics, and neuroscience. He argues that consciousness cannot be reduced merely to the interactions of neurons and chemicals in the brain. While the brain undoubtedly plays a critical role in shaping our perceptions and memories, Collins sees human consciousness as a window into something much larger. To him, the mind is not just a machine, it is the seat of the soul. Collins frequently emphasizes that the mystery of consciousness remains unsolved in scientific terms. In interviews and lectures, he has noted that despite advances in neuroscience, we still do not know how subjective awareness arises. This, he suggests, points to the possibility that consciousness transcends biology. In his words, science can't answer every question, particularly those that concern meaning, purpose, and the existence of the soul. For Collins, the soul is not just a theological concept, it is a real dimension of human experience, one that calls for respect and contemplation. When it comes to life after death, Collins is careful not to make absolute claims. He does not pretend to know what awaits us beyond this life, but he strongly believes that death is not the end. His conviction is rooted in both his faith and in the ethical, emotional, and even scientific implications of consciousness. He describes death as a transition rather than a termination, an event that marks the end of bodily function, but not necessarily the extinction of the self. Importantly, Collins does not rely on dogma to make his case. His arguments are grounded in logic, humility, and a willingness to entertain mystery. He openly acknowledges the limitations of both science and theology, and he invites others to approach questions of life and death with an open mind. In his role as a scientist, he has called for a broader understanding of reality, one that leaves room for both empirical evidence and spiritual truth. One of the most striking aspects of Collins' position is that it has not hindered his scientific career. In fact, it has amplified his voice in both communities. His leadership during the Human Genome Project, which successfully mapped the 3 billion letters of human DNA, was a triumph of modern science. And yet, even at the peak of this achievement, Collins described feeling awe, not just at the complexity of the genome, but at the beauty and coherence of its design. To him, this awe is not incompatible with belief. It is, in fact, a form of reverence. Over the years, Collins has become a spokesperson for what he calls the harmony between science and faith. He has spoken before churches, universities, and scientific bodies, always with the same message, that belief in God and belief in evidence are not mutually exclusive. In fact, he believes they lead to the same ultimate truths. This belief extends to his views on the afterlife. He sees human beings as spiritual beings having a temporary physical experience, and that this earthly life is just one chapter in a much longer story. In his later writings and public talks, Collins has also emphasized love as a force that points beyond biology. He argues that love, altruism, and the human sense of moral responsibility cannot be explained by natural selection alone. These aspects of our being, he suggests, may hint at a transcendent purpose, a reason we are here, and a reason we go on. For Francis Collins, then, the belief in life after death is not blind faith. It is a conclusion drawn from reason, experience, and a humble recognition of the mystery that still surrounds us. He reminds us that the greatest scientists are not those who claim to have all the answers, but those who are willing to ask the deepest questions. And one of those questions is, what happens when we die? Collins doesn't claim to know for sure, but he does believe that something continues, that our consciousness, our essence, is not extinguished with our last breath, and that science, far from disproving the soul, may one day help us understand where it goes. Albert Einstein is often misunderstood. Though many cite him as a figure of strict rationalism or even materialism, the reality of his personal beliefs was far more nuanced and, in many ways, deeply spiritual. Einstein did not believe in a personal God who intervenes in human affairs, but he also rejected the idea that the universe was a meaningless machine. What he described instead was a sense of awe, a reverence for the mysterious order woven into the fabric of reality. To him, that order was not accidental. It hinted at something greater, something eternal. One of Einstein's most famous quotes, "God does not play dice with the universe," was not a profession of religious faith, but a philosophical challenge. He said it in opposition to the randomness proposed by quantum mechanics, particularly as championed by Niels Bohr. Einstein believed that the laws governing the universe were not based on chance, but on principles that reflect deep structure, beauty, and consistency. He saw this not as theology, but as evidence that reality is more than just particles in motion. He wrote, "The most beautiful experience we can have is the mysterious. It is the fundamental emotion which stands at the cradle of true art and true science." For Einstein, wonder and science were not opposites, they were intertwined. And in that wonder he sensed a universal intelligence, one that permeates all existence. While he didn't pray or follow religious rituals, he often spoke about what he called a cosmic religion, a way of understanding the universe that evokes humility, not doctrine. In letters and conversations, Einstein frequently expressed belief in something beyond the individual self. After the death of his longtime friend and fellow physicist Michel Besso, he wrote a now famous line, "Now he has departed from this strange world a little ahead of me. That means nothing." People like us, who believe in physics, know that the distinction between past, present, and future is only a stubbornly persistent illusion. This statement, often quoted, hints at something profound. Einstein did not view death as a true end. He saw time itself as flexible, relative, and perhaps even meaningless from the point of view of ultimate reality. In that framework, the soul, if it exists, would not simply vanish. It would continue, perhaps integrated into a larger whole, just as energy is never lost, but only transformed. Einstein often used the language of science to point toward metaphysical questions. He argued that the comprehensibility of the universe was itself a miracle. The eternal mystery of the world, he said, is its comprehensibility. Why should the universe obey laws at all? Why should it be mathematically elegant? Why should the human mind be capable of uncovering those laws? To Einstein, this was not just a coincidence. It was a sign. A clue that human consciousness, the rational mind, and the cosmos itself are connected at a fundamental level. And this leads directly into his belief about the soul. Though Einstein never spoke of the soul in a religious context, he did speak about it as a kind of continuation, an essence that is part of a much greater system. He often referred to the human being as part of the whole. In one of his most famous reflections, he wrote, "A human being is part of the whole, called by us universe, a part limited in time and space. He experiences himself, his thoughts and feelings, as something separated from the rest, a kind of optical delusion of his consciousness." He goes on to call this illusion a kind of prison, and encourages the expansion of awareness toward a deeper connection with the universe, other beings, and the eternal. This is not the speech of a cold rationalist. It is the voice of someone who understood the spiritual longing at the core of human life. Einstein believed that ethics, compassion, and humility flowed naturally from a proper understanding of our place in the cosmos. He did not think the human mind existed in isolation. Instead, he viewed our consciousness as a ripple within the cosmic ocean, a temporary pattern in something much larger, more enduring. Even in his scientific work, Einstein was guided by principles that felt more mystical than mechanical. He once wrote, "Science without religion is lame. Religion without science is blind." By religion, he did not mean church or dogma. He meant the feeling of unity with something vast and unknowable. His cosmic religion rejected miracles, but embraced wonder. It rejected anthropomorphic gods, but embraced an impersonal intelligence far beyond comprehension. Toward the end of his life, when asked directly if he believed in an afterlife, Einstein responded with his characteristic caution, but also with quiet conviction. "I do not believe in personal immortality," he said, "but I do believe in the continuity of energy and structure." In other words, what we are is never truly lost. We return to the universe that formed us, transformed perhaps, but not erased. Einstein's thoughts on life, death, and the soul were not declarations of faith, but invitations to think more deeply. He saw no contradiction between scientific rigor and spiritual awe. In fact, he believed they required each other. And in his own way, he left behind not just a theory of relativity, but a vision of human existence as sacred, interconnected, and enduring. One that continues to inspire those seeking answers beyond the limits of the material world. Dear friends, if you liked the video, please like it, and don't forget to subscribe to the channel. See you soon.